Don't forget to subscribe to Basement Tales. Just go on Apple, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts and hit that subscribe button. We release a podcast every Thursday. That way you'll be sure not to miss an episode. Welcome to Basement Tales with Sam Jackman, Charlie Einsman, Ed Grass, and Sandra Delancey. We have fun telling crazy but true stories about turning the worst possible property disasters into bags of money. Along the way, we'll pass along some important lessons to help you make cash on real estate. Sam and Charlie walked away from cubicle hell 25 years ago. Starting with no property, they created their own Clear Sky group of companies, sold hundreds of houses, bought dozens of rentals, and made millions in hard money loans. I'm Ed, a big firm litigator until muscular dystrophy made me find a hobby other than suing people. I miss it. Sandra's the normal person here with a real job plus some rentals. Her decades of friendship with the group, from office flunkies to property gurus, might help keep us all humble and focused on learning something. I wouldn't count on it. Right. Well, so anyway, yeah, because I only skimmed the bio. Can you introduce Catrina to us, Sandra?
Yeah,
What do I need to know?
For you guys who can see us, there's a new person here, rather than our usual cast of characters. Me and Sam, Ed, and Charlie. We have a special guest, Catrina Jones, here this week, and Catrina is a local Washingtonian. I'll read a little bit about her bio. She's actually a lawyer, so you guys heard about that already. She started out in a small practice here in the DC area, actually in Maryland, before she moved into the DC office of the Attorney General, where she was doing things like, child abuse cases and child neglect cases and all that terrible stuff, including prostitution and slumlord cases. So that's kind of where she gets to us,
So a lot better than real estate is what you're saying.
Well, we may have seen her at some point, or Charlie and Sam, I don't know. In 2012, Catrina began working in DC at the DCRA, or Consumer and Regulatory Affairs. So we know about that, working in licensing and things like that. And then 2016, she moved over to DCHA, or the DC Housing Authority, where she had management responsibility over the voucher program. So this is kind of how I heard about Catrina, is, her work with the voucher programs here in DC. I know we talk a lot about Section 8 on this podcast. So we have somebody who actually knows something about, Section 8 in the DC area. So that's why I was interested in Catrina and talk to her about her work. So hopefully she can shed some light, on the topic and any other topic that she's interested in, talking to.
Well, who agreed to have Catrina on? Because I'm triggered by this. She actually knows things and has done this in real life. I'm intimidated. Usually I can just say stuff and you guys have no idea if it's true.
Don't be.
Catrina's going to be our fact checker from now on.
Oh, wow. I'm not sure that my real estate brokerage knowledge is going to.
I will do my best.
And Sandra's given a list of some of the past accomplishments. Right now, all of that experience, Catrina takes to thejonesgroupdc.com, which is her firm where she can, answer detailed questions about your particular case in DC.
We've got Catrina put forward some points.
Yeah.
To get us rolling. Did you see those, Sandra, as well?
I did see those points.
Yeah.
So we can get rolling.
Yeah.
We're gonna, Catrina, this kind of flows. So, as you're talking, we'll jump in and, we'll add some stories. And because it's basement tales, we like to throw some tales in there. So Sam and Charlie and Ed, between the three of them, and, a little bit of my knowledge, we have a lot of tales about, things that have happened in the DC area to us and, by us. In the DC area as well. So we'll share those as well to hopefully enlighten our, audience with, these tales.
Well, just for starters, Catrina, we own quite a few Section 8 properties.
Okay.
Most of them are in Virginia. So we're very familiar, at least on the Virginia side, with the Section 8 and how it works. I might say we probably, 12 or 15 properties. It was a lot more, but because of the cutbacks and, Department of Housing, they've cut back some of the Section 8 vouchers. We've sort of slimmed our portfolio down a little bit just to keep up with the times. But yeah, we have we have a lot of experience in being landlords of Section 8 properties. And so this is why I think you're just a phenomenal guest for us. And I want to thank you for taking your time and being on with us.
No, no problem. Actually, where's my camera? There it is. Okay. No, so I do want to start this off by making one correction. Do you remember some time ago when Prince George's County was referred to as PG County and they rebranded themselves and they no longer like that name? They are now Prince George's County.
Yes.
My correction
Did I say PG County?
Say that again?
Did I say PG County?
No, but just in
okay.
general, there was this big thing. So my correction is it's not been called Section 8 in some time. It's called HCVP, the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And it's specifically called that because when you get a subsidy via a voucher, you have the choice to look for a place. You're not relegated just to properties owned by the government, which is public housing. So
Right.
Section 8 is the old term. It is
Section
now
8, did that refer to just public housing? Is that how it originated? Is that?
I'm not sure about the origins, but I do know most people thought of the voucher program when they said Section 8. I don't know if they referred to the public housing side.
Oh, okay. So
It was
HCVP.
Right, which stands for Housing Choice Voucher Program.
And that's all of our properties, HCVP.
Yes.
Because it's funny because all of our tenants have come to us personally and specifically, and we have a lot of referrals within HCVP because they like us as landlords.
Good.
So a lot of the folks know each other, and so there was quite a couple of years ago, I was getting calls off the hook from people that I didn't know that had vouchers calling to see if we had any other inventory.
So you must be doing something right then if you get that big of a demand.
Yeah, it was
There are a lot of
it was
landlords that are
actually
not-
nice.
Say that, yeah, well, that's good. That's good. We have some landlords who don't get that sort of call volume. And I think that's a reflection of the relationships that have been built between the landlords and their tenants. And so I commend you for building such a reputation so that people are calling you, clamoring to get into your units. Yeah, that's really important. But so I did want to start with that sort of correction. So based upon some of what you guys sent me, I guess I could start with, so how do people qualify for a subsidy? There's a long process. And initially they apply to get on the wait list, which has been closed in the district for many, many, many years. And I'm not even sure when they plan on opening it back up. But when I was at DCHA, I believe the wait list was about 70,000, but I need to qualify that, okay? Here's why I need to qualify that. When you apply to get on the wait list, you can apply for public housing or a voucher or any of a number of other housing types. So every time you apply for one of those, if I apply for 4 types, my name might show up 4 times in that list of 70,000. So that number is not a scrubbed number, okay? I think it better reflects the types of housing need that people acknowledge when they initially applied for some sort of assistance with housing, okay?
Can you elaborate on what those types of housing are? I mean, you mentioned a couple, but what are some of the others? What is there other than public and the subsidized plan? What else is there?
So understand this, HUD funds the majority of the voucher program, but there, depending upon the jurisdiction, are also local sources of funding. So I could have applied for a local funding source, I don't know, called Home First. I'm just throwing that out as an example. So that is local versus federal. So it depends on your jurisdiction, how many programs there are available that the participant or the potential participant applies for. So the options, I think, are based upon what's available where you are, okay? So when I sign up, if I need housing assistance, if I just check, for example, public housing, when my name is finally called, that's the only kind of housing they're considering me for. So I accept public housing, and then I can only move within the units that in DC, the housing authority owns. If they only have 10 properties, I can only rotate if I want to between those 10 properties. But when I initially apply for public housing, a voucher that is supported by HUD dollars, as well as all of the local housing subsidy types, then the first one that I get called on, I get to say yay or nay. If I say yay, then I'm going to be taken off the wait list for those others, okay? So I don't get different bites at the apple necessarily. I have to choose at the beginning how many of the various housing subsidy options that I want. All right. So that's why I said earlier, that 70,000 needs to be, it's not a scrub list, because I could apply for, if there's 6 types, I could apply for all 6 types. You may only apply for one. So your name would only show up once. Mine would show up all 6 times.
Yeah, but these folks that are on this waiting list, where are they right now? Are we to assume that they're living with other family members? Where are they?
I think there are a number of scenarios that could answer that question. You know, in Black and brown communities, we huddle up in houses. We are overhoused, right? So you have extended families, even not even blood relations, that are living together in sometimes very cramped quarters, because that they need that to survive. And so if I've applied for the wait list and I know it's, 5-10 years before they call my number, I'm surviving until then, hoping that something happens and my number gets called quickly. But what slows that process down a lot of times is the ways that people get around waiting legitimately for their number to be called, right? There are certain categories of people that are considered emergencies. So people who are in homeless shelters, veterans, and there are a few other categories. And so those seem to always be able to jump in to get assistance, which sort of, it keeps things at an imbalance. There's 4 categories, and I'm not going to remember all 4 right now, that are considered priority groups. So I just gave you 2. One is people in homeless shelters and the veterans, but there are a couple others. And so the agency tries really, really hard to make sure that these priority groups get access to vouchers sooner because of their deemed vulnerable populations, right? But when you have the system set up like that, and then you have people who abuse it, then it does slow down the time that it takes for somebody who applied legitimately and doesn't fall to be called, to be processed, to then look for housing or to be assigned housing if they apply for and were called for public housing.
Could I just ask, Catrina, this raised,
Sure.
and you raised this question in my mind before, and I wanted to ask this anyway. When you talk about that wait list, I've had, I don't have many units, but I had somebody come who was really nice and would love to rent to, but they just didn't have the income. And they looked like they might be able to qualify for some assistance. Or let's say we have somebody come in who clearly would qualify, for whatever the income levels. But are you saying that it's almost like should they bother applying? I mean, or did you say the wait list is closed? So if Mr. Jones comes to me and I think he'd be a good candidate, is it even worth his time to try to get on the list, or can he not even get on the list?
So the wait list is closed. You're not getting on the list, but you can still apply and be deemed eligible, right? And I think Mr. Jones should still apply, because let's say, for instance, he has a mental health condition. He may be able to get in sooner than the normal wait list time if he goes through DBH. So there are lots of programs that have available other avenues for people to get in. So I would always say apply. You just never know what's available at that time.
And where would be the key place, we would say in DC at least, go to this office? What's the office that you'd start that process?
So I don't know that I would be comfortable saying there's one central location, because sometimes the clients that come through HCVP were funneled through that agency to the agency from Department of Behavioral Health or from other entities, smaller based organizations that provide a smaller amount of subsidy. And those people don't have to get on the wait list, right?
I see.
But sometimes the majority, let me not say sometimes, the majority can come through the DCHA. And on the eligibility side is where they apply for either public housing or the voucher or whatever other programs are available. So I will tell them to apply everywhere that they can. And there's really no one that I'm aware of that walks people through. You kind of have to stumble upon, oh, I can apply for that too. Oh, okay, well, how do I do that? Who can walk me through that process? So it's a really mammoth undertaking to help participants who are in need of housing figure out what all of their options are, where to go. And so just apply everywhere and ask questions and follow up. That's a big thing that they have to do.
Katrina, once your name gets called, off of the list and you accept whatever that program is, you're kind of stuck with that program.
Pretty much, barring some emergencies. So there are some exceptions because of their shift now in their focus between public housing and the vouchers issuances. But for the most part, for example, if I picked public housing, that's the only one that I selected, and they call me for public housing, I'm in public housing. unless my situation changes, my trajectory in life changes, that I'm able to afford housing that's not owned by the government on my own. So I would recommend for people who need housing assistance to apply for all of the options, because you just never know where you're going to be when they call you. And there's some people who were called 10 years later, sometimes 13 years later, and do you even know that what you're going to be doing or where you're going to be in 13 years? You really don't. You really don't.
The situation still even going to be the same? I mean, you may have had a 5-year-old who's now, 18 and not in the house. So you don't.
Right. So herein lies an interesting scenario. So imagine you, Sandra, when you applied for all the different types of subsidy, it was you, your 10-year-old daughter.
Oh, Lord, no.
That's it, right? Let's say it was just you and your 10-year-old daughter. But 10 years later, your number gets called.
Right.
At that time, you're no longer a household of two. You got married, you had 2 more kids. She's a teenager now, or not anymore. She's 20 now. She said 2 or 3 kids, maybe. Her boyfriend's living with y'all. Your mother's now living with you. The household composition has changed. So when you get called up, they're no longer going to force you to find a unit that fits that previous household size. Assuming everybody is qualified now and they pass the background checks, they now have to accommodate your new household size.
Right.
So can you imagine how that affects the inventory? Because if you know anything about real estate in the DMV, there's a lack of inventory for 3 bedrooms and up, especially in DC. But you now need a 3-bedroom and up with your new family composition.
Right.
So how easy is it going to be for you to find a place now with that new household composition versus the 1-bedroom you and your 10-year-old needed? It's much easier that way.
Right.
And so that changes a lot of things. And that's the struggle, I think, that the agency finds itself in, just because people's lives don't go on hold just because they're waiting to be caught off of a list. They continue to live.
Right.
And everyone looks for love, has relationships, families expand, things happen. And at times when they're called, they still need housing assistance. And so you meet them where they are.
Right.
You meet them where they are.
I had a woman call and she had 5 children, probably under the age of 10.
God bless her.
Yeah, so I'm imagining that probably when she got on this list, she didn't have 5 kids under the age of 10.
Yeah.
She had
It may
a
have
lot
just been her.
It may have just been her, but she's
Correct.
trying to cram into a house now that probably is not fit for that many, but that's her situation now. So she's just trying to get off of her father's couch and get into a house. So I'm imagining that when your name comes up and you finally get your paper and you can actually go out there and start looking, you're almost going to take whatever's available. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Can you imagine the excitement of thinking you're never going to get called and 10 years later you get that call and you still qualified?
Yeah.
You're going to take advantage of that. You're not going to pass it up.
Yeah.
You're not.
Okay. Good point.
I'm not sure where we were, but I just wanted to let you guys know that that's how people get qualified for subsidy. I know another question was, what are their obligations as participants of the HCVP? And so if you, as an HCVP landlord, there's something called a HAP contract. I will hold it up to you. Right?
Yep. Yeah, we're familiar with the HAP contract.
Oh yeah, very familiar with that. Yeah.
I couldn't see line 2. Put it up again. I can't see it.
Okay.
Oh, that's what it says. Okay, got it.
Yep. It is 13 pages long. And for even lawyers, the way it's written is a little bit ambiguous, a little bit vague. It's more of a guiding document, right? And so this document really is your Bible. And for any landlords who get involved with and become participating landlords of the HCVP, you really need to understand this contract in and out, because it tells you pretty much what you need to know. One thing that I notice a lot of landlords don't know is what exceptions are there that allow the agency to cancel your contract. So when you sign up and you're approved to be a landlord in the HCVP program, for the first year, the agency is not able to cancel your contract barring 9 exceptions, right? And they are actually outlined here on page 4, but it's not, you'll see my little highlights. I scribble on everything. That's from law school days, but you'll notice if you have it in front of you, you can access it. It's on page 4 of 13. It's in part C. It's in part B, and it's called clause 4, term of HAP contract. And so what that means is, for example, if you've complied with everything else as a landlord, but you, for instance, fail your HQS, which is your inspection, okay, the agency can terminate your contract. If, for example, Sandra is my tenant, and let's say she's the best tenant in the world, but she is the victim of domestic violence. And let's say her boyfriend, who's not on the lease and not on the household composition, does her real bad, beats her so bad she's hospitalized, and she decides to never return to my unit again. I can't come after Sandra. The contract with the agency is terminated.
Right, we have had that. We've had that.
Yeah, it happens, but a lot of landlords don't understand that, right? So there's about 7 other exceptions, but barring any of those for the first year, you get your money automatically from the agency. So one of the things I always impress upon people is to read the HAP contract, use it as your Bible. And before you sign it, if you don't understand it, ask for advice, ask for clarity. Okay.
Yeah, and let me just interrupt here for our radio listeners. I searched on Google for housing assistant payments contract. And the first thing that popped up was a link to housingandurbandevelopment.gov, and the whole contract's right there. So
Absolutely.
you could download it and follow along with this discussion. Or boy, I'm looking at this as a lawyer saying I need to snuggle up by the fireplace with this one. And sitting. I used to read insurance contracts for fun. I'm an odd person, but certainly, yeah. So I would recommend anybody who's interested in being a landlord. I didn't realize it was so easy to get this. Pull up that contract and look at it. They give you at least a good idea, and then turn it back to Catrina to tell us some of the fun nuances that you might pick up or not pick up on.
So this HAP contract lays out the 9 exceptions that allow the agency to cancel their contract with you, but then it also goes into participant behavior that allows the agency to then terminate the subsidy for them, which then also affects your payments, right? And so there are many things that the tenant is or participant, I keep switching up, is supposed to do to stay in compliance. One is the household composition can't change. Now, of course, they would never do that, right? No tenants ever change the composition and fail to notify their landlords.
Oh.
But it includes things such as
my boyfriend doesn't live here. Just visiting.
But it includes, having a baby, any expansion of the household, because the agency needs to vet, especially if it's an adult, if that person is fits the criteria so that they are eligible to join that household or not. But all of that goes to wear and tear. It goes to maybe a change in the subsidy. Maybe that additional person changes whether or not that unit can adequately fit them and they become overhoused. So it's really important that you make sure as soon as you know of a change in the housing composition that you let the agency know. The family shouldn't be running a business out of there. They shouldn't be.
Oh gosh, all the stuff that we've heard of. So,
yes.
Well, running what kind of business? I mean, running an unlawful business.
So, for instance, I'm working from my home-based office. I don't think that's what they intended when they drafted this. I think they mean like complete enterprise. It's like daycare, those kinds of things, right? They have to inform or they're in violation of the program's rules. They can't sublease. Of course, that never happens. And they can't assign or transfer the unit at all. Okay. And then they're required to
things though, Catrina. And I'm thinking that, from what I hear about being a landlord in DC, you cannot break a contract or a lease with a person in DC, period, no matter what.
So you can. All right. So think of a triangle. All right. At the top of the triangle is DCHA, the housing authority. Bottom left is you guys, the landlords. Bottom right is the tenant. In order for participating landlords with HCVP, for that whole process to be successful, all 3 of those pieces have to be in sync. Remember in school, they taught us that the 3 branches of the government, neither one controls the other, right? But any one of the 3 can affect the operation and function of the other 2. Right. It's essentially the same thing. The landlord doesn't do their part, the agency will have to cancel the contract. But guess what? That just means that they're not paying you anymore. It doesn't get that tenant out of your unit. Conversely, if the tenant does something they're not supposed to do, the agency can cancel their subsidy, but they're still on your lease. That doesn't get them out of the unit, right? So if the agency doesn't do what it's supposed to do, either the tenant or the landlord can come after the agency. So it all works together, right?
Well, I guess that's the core of it, right?
That's it.
It's the getting out of the unit,
Yes.
right? That's it. Like, subsidy or payment, if you're having a problem with your tenant,
Correct.
no matter where you are, payment, no payment, anything, it's
Just
getting them out of the unit. And
Correct.
that leads you to this great big room at Landlord Tenant Court, which has very
Correct.
hard benches.
I
And they
know.
will let you sit there
All
from when
day.
they start at 9 till 4 in the afternoon and have no respect for anyone's time. So you don't want to find yourself in that giant room with all these people just getting beat on by the judge. It's just
And
worst.
I was gonna add to that. I was going to add to that, though, that can, as I'm sure you know, Sam, but that can happen with any tenant, regardless of
Right.
who's paying.
100%. Yeah.
And so, yeah, right. So it's not like by not doing, and again, I know you're not saying this, that not doing HCVP, you think, oh, well, it'll be easier to get somebody out. It's basically the same problem. And the court system, for better or worse in DC, is very lenient towards
Tenants.
towards the tenants. And,
Correct.
and this is where Sam's issue about the time comes up. You know, just a little bit that we've been there. I sort of described it as Dante's ninth circle of hell for
I wouldn't
everybody.
even call it a little bit. That didn't feel like a little bit at all.
Right. And again, for everybody, including the judges for that matter, but because they don't want to, you know, do these terrible things. But this poor individual landlord had come in and the person didn't show. Then the second time they called the tenant, the second time the tenant did something, and the landlord is like, can you just issue judgment because the tenant's not coming? And the judge set it for a third hearing. And it's like, well, if they don't come that time or so. And I'm thinking this poor regular dude is probably taking off 2 days and is going to take off a third day from work, which again, sorry to interrupt, but it goes back to getting a quality tenant. And you can get a quality tenant through the voucher program and a terrible tenant privately and vice versa.
I think the voucher tenant's more inclined to be a better tenant because they have something to lose. Now you got your average unsubsidized deadbeat, and they have absolutely nothing to lose. They're just hanging out for years in your house.
Right.
Just delaying this, delaying that. These people waited 10 years to get on this list, right? So they're not trying to get off it, you know, and have a problem with the housing office.
So I have some thoughts on that. One, I'm ashamed to admit it, but for many years, I believe the misperception that all, at the time, Section 8 tenants tore up your house, were horrible. Oh, never do it. Oh my gosh. Wait. Until and what proved my point was a neighbor of mine, he and his family moved to Alexandria and rented their house out. And he said, oh, Catrina, she works for the government. She got 4 kids. They're going to be great. And I said, okay. Didn't know that they were Section 8 or not. Found out later, but that was a horrid family. And the kid, the littlest woman would run outside with no clothes on. She had an adult son that had some severe cognitive delays and would roam the neighborhood and try to open up people's doors, not trying to break in. I just think, I don't know, there's something that he did. The teenager would throw rocks and break my windows and other neighbors' windows. It was just insane. And she actually berated me one day for chastising her kid about, you can't damage people's property. So that to me proved this idea that they're horrible people. And then I started working at the housing authority with this same mindset. And I had to admit that I was wrong. And I have to say, honestly, the vast majority of the voucher participants are honorable people that are having a hard time. There is a core group that keeps circulating, and that's part of the problem, right? So why do they circulate? This is the thing that really needs to be addressed, I think. Number one, if Sandra is this horrible tenant, but I need her out, she's tearing my place up, I'm spending all this money, I'm waiting. So Sam, when you call for the referral, oh, she's great, and get her out of here. So that same bad behavior goes to Sam, then it goes to Ed, like it just keeps going around. So it seems like there's more of her than there really are, but it's because I don't want to do the work it takes to get my documentation in place and take her to court. I just want her out and I'll deal with it later. And so what the agency tried to do is educate landlords about, no, I know it's more work, but it doesn't help anybody if you don't go after Sandra when she starts making these lease violations and these transgressions, because the next landlord is
going to have to stop being the bad tenant. I've corrected my ways. I pay my rent now. So I think it's Charlie now who's not paying.
Oh, you don't want Charlie as your bad tenant.
Well, no.
He would be the worst
Well,
tenant
no,
ever.
Wear their clothes. They don't run around naked.
No, but for us, that's far from the truth. We have some great tenants.
And
And we
that's
have
really
some very stable tenants, but again, it's all about the initial phases on how you evaluate these tenants.
Listen,
You got to evaluate
can't
them all the same.
I can't underscore how important it is to do the legwork at the beginning. You have to dig deep and do a very thorough job of screening your potential tenants. And there are some things that I've seen some landlords do that I came into contact with, and that for me made them stand out. They had very few tenant problems because they went this extra mile. So the screening includes not just a background check, but you want to look at their rental history, their credit. You don't just go to the previous place and ask, how is it? Call the landlord before that. Talk to the neighbors. Do unscheduled stops and visit their place. If you do an unscheduled stop and the place smells like a chemical, but listen, if you go to their place unscheduled and they let you in, it smells like a chemical plant and it's unscheduled, that means they probably keep their place clean on a regular basis. But if it's a scheduled stop, a scheduled visit, and everything looks like out of a magazine, you can get a sense of how they take care of their unit, because that's how they're going to take care of yours.
That's right. And Sam and Ed laugh at me and even Sandra. Everybody laughs at me to this day. What's the number one thing that I do? I show up unannounced to where they're living. That's part of the screening process. I show up unannounced. I always say, hey, I'm Charlie Einsman. I happen to be in the neighborhood. I see that you applied for one of our properties. I want to meet you personally. That's the only reason why I'm here. So they come, we talk face to face. I see how the yard is. I don't ask myself in, but once they open the door, I see inside. That tells me all I need to know.
Absolutely. And you want to make sure.
We have voucher choice participants. They've been on our property for 10 or 15 years. Because the other thing that we do is we acknowledge that it is a relationship. We have to create an ongoing relationship because I want you there for a very, very long time. I don't want you who's been moving around every year, every 2 years. I want stability. We understand that you're not stable to begin with because of your finances, but that doesn't mean you can't be a stable person. And that's exactly what we look for. And Ed and Sam and Sandra, they laugh at me all the time.
Well, that's just fun to laugh at you. But Catrina raised a point that I think is really good. I hadn't even thought about this, is not just to call the current landlord, but in particular, but the landlord before that, because they don't have the incentive to say, oh, I love this so-and-so, you'll love her too. And they're thinking, oh, I'm getting rid of this. But if you call the one before, they have no dog in the hunt.
Oh, yeah, they're great. They're the best tenant ever. Come on, move them on. Yeah.
Right. But if you ask the one before, it's still, there's other information. I mean, maybe things have changed or whatever. They could have gone bad after that or good, but it's good information. It's much better information.
It is. It's helping you paint a thorough picture of this person that's applying to rent in your property, your legacy, the investment that you made. And so the relationship part is really important. One of the things, I had a lot of takeaways from my time at DCHA, but one of many is the number of times I consoled participants, male, female, young, and old, because a lot of landlords are in the real estate business for money only and don't care about their tenants, and the tenants aren't seen. And so when they actually are seen and heard, it's different. A lot of them come in expecting not to be seen and heard because that's just how they're treated, being people in need. Think about how many agencies that touch them and how many times it's like next and no one sees or hears them. And so when someone makes that effort and establishes that relationship, it really does turn things around. And so there's some landlords who, give a gift basket occasionally, or, just anything nice when the kid graduates from high school, like a little gift card, little things like that, just to show some sort of appreciation. And you can use your imagination, but the fact that if you did this, would be willing, you would show them your willingness to actually invest in them a bit. And those are the relationships that breed the best, most successful long-term rental situations for the landlord who doesn't have as many repairs for stuff that shouldn't be broken, right? And also for the tenant who wants some stability. And so
we totally agree with that. I mean, and I think that's one of the reasons why our tenants love us, is because it's the simple things, right? Anytime anything goes wrong with that property, we are there to fix it We don't care what it is. If it's as simple as screwing in a light bulb form, Wilfredo will do it. If it's as simple as replacing an air conditioning filter, if it's as simple as changing fixing a leak right away, we're there within 24 to 48 hours. And the beautiful thing about it is that not only do our tenants have relationships with us, but they have relationships with our maintenance guys.
Oh,
And I think they really, really like that.
Oh, they love our guys.
I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. So, I mean, a person becomes ill and they don't have anyone to help them, and they call up and say, look, I can't afford to have a lawn care service done. Can your guy come over and just do it, or clean the gutters or whatever? We don't do it every month, but we'll send someone over, to take care of it. We don't want it to be a mess. And it costs a little bit. They ask every couple of years for something. It's no big deal. And they're taking care of the place just way, way better. And, they're a person we're in a long-term relationship with.
Absolutely.
That's how we look
Well,
at
and
it.
what gets me about this is not only from an ethical, religious, golden rule, treat others like you'd like to be treated. If you're just thinking as a raw, I want to make the most money, it's also going to help you make more money. You're going to have less problems by being a stand-up person. And I love the little gift idea or whatever. And just even Charlie's meeting them. Like, I'm the guy who owns this place. And so you're not a faceless corporation that doesn't give them the time of day. Who would take care of that property, at least in the back of your mind subconsciously. And I just don't get this, like, just squeeze every last dime out of every last situation. It's just,
well, you're not going to squeeze money out of the folks in these programs.
It'll end up costing you more too.
That's what you got to do. You got to conserve your asset, right? So there's no squeeze you're going to get. The only thing you can do is have the relationship where they support you and your asset, because you cannot get $20 out of these situations. So you got to be very careful with the relationship.
I think some landlords figure, I'll let the place go to heck, and then I'll just fix it when I want to sell it. But the amount of damage that can be done is amazing. Yeah.
Do we have time for one basement tale in here? We could talk about. We have a unit. It's a duplex. It's out in Triangle, Virginia, and both units are currently and have been subsidized. So this property came into our portfolio. We got it from a bank. Wasn't that right, Charlie? We got
Premier Asset Services, Wells Fargo to be exact.
It had been a duplex for 30 years. It's a strange use in a single family neighborhood, but it's been divided physically and separately metered. And somehow, Charlie, how did you get in touch with a lady who used to live there? And she moved back. She had lived there 10 or 15 years. And now she's lived there another 10 or 15 years with us.
Yeah, this is Dot. No, it's because when we were doing the bank, we were REO agents. And so this was a bank-owned listing. And so
2007.
We had the Wells Fargo listings, Premier Asset Services. So one of the things that we had to do is we could not sell that property unless it was vacant. So I had to go do a keys for cash with my friend Dot. Dot is Dorothy. Dot stands for Dorothy. And so Dorothy was the occupant. The top unit was vacant, but Dorothy or Dot was in the Dot was in the top unit. Dot was in the top unit, and the lower unit was vacant. But Dot was really high on the lower unit. She wanted to move into the lower unit, but we had to move Dot out.
The house was a wreck.
We had to sell that property vacant. So we did like a $8,000 or $6,000 keys for cash for Dot. And I still remember the day of meeting her at the Bank of America to give her cash because she wasn't accepting a check from me. So I had to go.
So Dot was smart, you're saying.
So Dot was smart. So I had to meet Dot at Bank of America, deposit the check in my account, and then give her the cash because she wasn't accepting the check from Wells Fargo, even though it was at a Bank of America. Well, push comes to shove, Dot relocated to another property. Well, what happened?
She knows everybody in the neighborhood. First, she's lived there for like 15 years.
Okay.
So she knows everybody.
And so what happened was we put the property on the market as an REO. We got the buyer to buy the property, but the buyer backed out for whatever reason because the buyer wanted to be a single family house and not its intended use, which was a duplex. Mm-hmm. So the buyer backed out. Well, what we did is we put a buyer in there, another attorney that we know, to actually buy the property. And then we ended up buying the property for him because we wanted to keep it as a rental because it had a grandfathered use as a duplex. So we ended up buying the property back from the lawyer about a couple months later. I don't know, he made it quick, 10 grand or 10 grand, and we sort of bought it for him more than what he paid for it. And then we just kept it as a duplex. Well, once I knew where Dot lived, and I knew that Dot wanted that lower unit. So once we ended up buying the house, I ended up reaching back out to Dot and said, Dot, we own this house now. Do you want to move back in? And remember, Dot had lived in this property for like 15 years. And this was the only property she knew for a long time. And I guess she wasn't in a very stable living arrangement. She hated her landlord. Well, she just broke her lease and moved back into our property.
Right away. She's been there. She's been in there for.
Dot's been there forever. And so one of the things is that we knew the caseworker in Prince William County. And so the caseworker enabled us to let Dot move back into our loader unit, transfer the voucher back to our property. And
Okay.
This is like.
So, but that's not the end of the story, because before long we had to rent the upstairs.
Yeah.
So we rented the upstairs. We thought we were going to be good citizens and rent the upstairs to someone who came through the program through one of the mental health services. And that all went okay for a few months, but then things started going downhill. And the upstairs person became very disruptive to Dot below. And so her son would play like video games, and she'd call the police. And it's because she thought the video games were Dot's, people pursuing her. She started having hallucinations about everything. And then anytime Dot would come in, she would lower down like a little card with a message on it off a string down in front of Dot's door, and tell Dot like really like outlandish, crazy things about things Dot's family's been doing and been involved in. And she'd research Dot and all this crazy stuff. Well, Dot couldn't take it. She said, if this continues, I'm going to have to leave. So before it escalated to the final stage, we get a call. Charlie gets a call, I think. Are you the one who got the call?
She had schizophrenia.
So that Charlie gets a call that the police want the key to our place. I'm like, well, I'm all the way, 30 minutes away. So she's like, no, we need the key right now. We're doing an extraction. And that was it.
Oh, wow.
They extracted her from there and not to return. And they took her
She
to
stopped taking
care,
her medication.
Care level and to a care facility.
Medication.
But poor Dot suffered for months with all that nonsense.
So that is a challenge when you rent to participants who come to a mental health program. They're supposed to stay on top of the participants' compliance, and that doesn't always happen. And so the housing can deteriorate. So I'm sorry.
That was very quick.
But when she was on her meds, though, she was the nicest person ever. She was great.
Fun.
Yeah,
it was really nice. But we tried to do that, and that didn't work out too well.
You're saying Catrina, someone is assigned to that person with the mental health issues, and they're going to work with them while they're.
Yes, but in my experience, though, when someone is assigned, routinely those people change. You get a new worker. The participant has to build up a new relationship. Like the ball gets dropped a lot because there's so much fluidity in that industry, and it just makes it hard to keep a line on all of your clients and who's doing what. Which means,
her health was so out of control that there was no one person that's going to be able to fix something like that.
Yeah, but that's one of the instances where the voucher program terminated our lease.
Yeah.
Right?
Once she was extracted, yes, they had to.
They terminated it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
Usually the participants in one program sometimes the participants in one program may also be in other programs. Is something that Catrina kind of educated me too.
Yeah. But as far as our other tenant in that particular case, Dot, I think Dot's been there 10 plus years.
Oh, with us, yeah. As a tenant to us and then tenant to prior people for.
You can't set Dot up anymore. That's what you're saying, right? You have to leave Dot alone.
Oh yeah. She's got a lady above her that they all get along. Nice.
They love each other. Yes, good. So, and that's been what, 5 or 6 years, right, Sam?
Oh,
maybe?
More.
Top unit, maybe more.
If there's some things I want to leave those who are listening with some tidbits or reminders that I think are really, really important. One is to educate yourself on the landlord and tenant laws in your jurisdiction. Don't get into this or be in it and not have done your homework, because you'll have a quick, fast, and hard lesson when you need to go to court. And that's not the time to figure things out, right? So,
amen. And let me just add briefly there, every jurisdiction has some kind of handbook you can look up online that in DC in particular has a landlord tenant handbook.
yes, but be careful because most of the information in DC is geared towards the tenant. So landlords, you really have to search long and hard, and you're going to have to, there's no central location. You really need to pull the information together and be good at it and share the information. So joining any organization where you guys can sort of share that information around would probably make a lot of sense for, especially the smaller landlords or those who are new at it and haven't sort of found their sea legs yet. So educating yourself on landlord and tenant laws is critical. We already talked about the importance of reading the HAP contract and understanding it. A lease. Your lease and the HAP contract are the two most important tools for you as landlords. I don't recommend just snatching a lease off the internet. You need to cater your lease to fit your portfolio, your property, your circumstances. You have to have some basic things in there, which I noticed a lot of the landlords at the Housing Authority were missing. For instance, all the specifics about rent. How much is it? When is it due? What tender do you accept? What late fees are when they start? And then security deposits. That's a big one that can slap landlords later. They aren't clear about the timing by which they have to return security deposits and what affects whether they get the whole amount or reduced amount. Who's allowed to reside in a unit? Yeah. Is it just the people on the lease? What's the process that they have to go through to alert you that other people have moved in? A pet policy. You need to have a pet policy. Here's one that I want more people to consider. Sometimes you get tenants who know exactly how to maintain appliances because they're not new at this. But some who have had to focus on survival or who are coming from a shelter don't necessarily know. So don't assume people know how to take care of your units like you do. So one thing I recommended that has been helpful, I've gotten feedback that is helpful, is when you selected a participant, whether they are a voucher participant or a market rate tenant, when you do your walkthrough, I already have it written out, but walk them through and explain to them how to use your dishwasher, your dryer, your refrigerator, your this, your that, and have it written down, make it an addendum. So there's no confusion later that, oh, I was supposed to change the vent. Really? Ever? I didn't know that. Oh, I'm supposed to do that. You don't want that confusion. That comes up a lot. Not changing the dryer vent and electrical issues coming up, not overloading the system. So
I have to say this quick thing. That I was out of law school and working as a lawyer, and I bought my first house. I'd grown up my whole life in apartments. And I said to my wife, how come the mailman or mail person is not flipping up that red flag when our mail is there? I thought the mailman or delivery person flipped the flag up so I'd know to get my mail, not that you put the mail in to tell the mail person to pick it up. I mean, so like things like changing filters. I mean, there's no dishonor in not knowing these things. You'd think I'd had all these degrees. I had no idea what that flag was for. Well, so it's a real thing.
To make you feel better, I only knew because my dad was at the post office for 35 years. So everything related to the post office, I knew. But you're right. There's some things that we take for granted. But if your life in totality or recently before getting called and getting this voucher is about survival, that's not in your mindset. You're not there. And so you have to explain to people how, because remember, this is your property. Everything that happens to it and about it is still your responsibility. So explain that to them. And again, make that an addendum. Make sure in your lease that you have a provision about landlord access. You'd be surprised how many leases are missing that. Or it may say landlord, needs to access the unit for repairs. It doesn't say, and we'll give 24 to 48 hours notice. It says nothing. So that has to be in there. It's very critical. And distinguish between.
Sam bought a commercial place that didn't have that access provision. Not his fault, but the prior people didn't have it in the lease. It was a nightmare.
Yeah.
Just that little thing. So I'm sure
and
residential is even worse.
They will use it. Make all legally required disclosures. You don't want your tenant to get the upper hand on you because they're savvier than you. They have enough time in the day to look at how to get around the laws because you didn't make a legally required disclosure, right? You don't want that.
Something like the lead paint or something like that.
Lead paint, or there was a fire and you had some not as professional contractor try to fix it up and you didn't know that it wasn't fixed up properly, but something happens while they're there. But for that disclosure, they may have decided not to rent. and I don't know, let's say a fire breaks out, did it damages your stuff or someone gets hurt, make legally required disclosures, okay? Don't discriminate. Don't discriminate. And then if you have to evict, evict legally. Evict legally. Evict legally.
Oh, yeah.
Although you may be tempted otherwise.
What if you're related to the person that you're renting from? Do you still have to evict legally?
You can't evict your husband.
You cannot.
In DC, somebody could sublease a couch and you may have to evict the person on the couch. It can get very complicated in some places.
Absolutely. I would even throw in a provision about keys, changing the locks. That's a big one. You should always have access to your unit.
Right.
But you'd be surprised the number of people who change the locks and then you can't get into your unit, even when it's a scheduled or unscheduled, you just can't get in. So you just have to think long and hard. The lease doesn't have to be 40 pages, but it should be more than 2, right? There needs to be enough in there. That's because it's really protecting your investment. And if all of this is explained at the beginning with all of the other things we talked about, you go a long way towards setting the tone, setting expectations, and letting them know, oh, I'm serious. And visit the property frequently. You may decide for your first property, you need to visit quarterly because of that situation, and this one twice a year. I don't know, but lay eyes on your property. You need to do that. And so it's a lot of work with some tenants more than others. You know, some are really needy or have other issues. Some not so much. They pay their rent on time. They don't bother you. Place is always fine. But adapt your approach to fit your properties and the tenants within them. But those are some of the tips that I would leave people who are listening and those that I understand have done these things and fared really, really well who were voucher participants. But let me make this one thing clear. The only distinction, the only one between tenants who are participants of the voucher program and market rate tenants is who's paying the rent. You shouldn't treat anybody any differently.
I agree.
That's it.
Totally
Your
agree.
obligations are the same. Your responsibility is the same. You should be in this for the same reasons. You should vet them the same. Everything is the same. The only difference is who's paying.
That's a good
Yeah, that's how we work it.
And it's all like you said, it's all a relationship.
It is. It's
all a relationship.
But even if the relationship starts off great and dandy, document everything. Don't do verbals because you're building a record just in case.
Yeah.
Because just know this. When the agency gets enough information and they want to move against a participant, which means they're deciding that they're going to try to get them terminated from the program. How do I say this? They, in the notice letter saying, hey, I'm picking on Sandra today. Hey, Sandra, we are going to move to try to terminate you from the program because you violated A, B, and C. By the way, here's a list of pro bono attorneys. They're getting free counsel. And they're not like Joe from the corner. These are suited up firms that have to get hours in. So they're coming in 3 deep with suits on. And if you don't have any documentation or records, you're already starting off at a loss. So document from the beginning. Emails, letters, whatever you do, but don't go by verbals because a great relationship can sour sometimes and you don't know the reason why. So those are the tips that I would leave folks listening with on how to approach
Catrina. So again, well, I'm just going to wrap up a little bit with Catrina. So Catrina actually is in private practice right now as well. And she owns the Jones Group DC, which is a PLLC here in the DC area. Her website address is thejonesgroup.com. She provides a variety of civil, services, as well as just recently in last month, it seems, or January 2021. She has launched her property management, arm of her business. So she's also in property management. So that's kind of the wrap.
Do we have a good email?
Charlie,
you have a good email address for her?
So that I can give you that. Actually, the website is thejonesgroupdc.com.
Okay.
That's okay. There's a lot of Jones groups out there, I realize. So I had to distinguish myself.
I'm going to tell you, you wrote thejonesgroup.com.
You know what? I probably did.
I think you're the only one. That's
oh my gosh. It's thejonesgroupdc.com and the email address is thejonesgroupdc@gmail.com.
Got it.
And the number is 202-905-5111. So give me a call.
Well, I
This has
have
been
to
very
say I'm a
helpful.
little irritated because I had to watch Sam and Charlie screw all this stuff up for the last 20 years. If I had just listened to this, podcast, I could have saved a lot of pain in the neck, because these are some tried and true and some great nuances, like I said, that I hadn't thought of. So this has been terrific. I've
those
learned
are
a
really
lot.
informative. I like your checklist at the end there. Things,
Well, I
tips.
hope it was helpful. If you have questions, let me know. This is a big thing. You can't cover everything in an hour, right? There's so much to this, as I'm sure you know.
Right.
We know.
So if you have more questions, let me know. I'm willing to answer anything.
Well, we should definitely have you back for some more stories and nuances
There
another
are
time
stories.
soon.
We didn't really get too many of your
Yeah.
basement tales, but I have a feeling there are a lot out there.
Oh, not really. Just, a landlord who was running a brothel and a drug ring out of the building that he owned. Nothing big, stuff like that.
Wait a second. Landlords can be bad too? That's shocking. That's
Listen,
shocking.
we've had some landlords doing some stuff. Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. So
we'll have to hear about that. That's in our brothel podcast.
Yes.
We could name that. This is the brothel podcast.
Basement brothel tales, really?
Oh, wow.
No, just today's episode.
Gotcha. Oh, wow.
Well, thank you again.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you very
appreciate it. You
much.
guys have a
Thanks.
great afternoon.
Thank you.
All right.
And also to send us your questions, comments, and feedback to our email address, yourstory@basementtales.com with 2T. Again, yourstory@basementtales.com. We'd like to hear maybe some of your stories. We'd like to hear your comments, your feedback, any questions that you guys may have. So please reach out to us and make some comments. Thanks.